So what I'm going to do is talk about why data context matters. And I'm going to talk about why it matters to people like me, why I think it should matter to people like you, but also I'm going to demonstrate why increasingly I think government and policymakers are starting to realize it's really important to them. And I'm actually going to show you at the very end of the talk that things have been happening in another building in this city while we've been here that's actually very relevant to data and context, which more on that later. So first of all, I'm going to go back in time. And this is Michael O'Higgins from the UK Audit Commission back in 2010. And if you don't know, the Audit Commission were asked to do a review of the UK government's transparency agenda. And of course, the transparency agenda was what was driving, or part of what was driving, the whole open data agenda in the UK. And the Audit Commission, because they worry about these things, they wanted to know, well, was it good value for money? What was the money being spent on? And was there any evidence it was actually generating any benefit? I'm not going to talk about that. What I am going to talk about is this really interesting quote that came out of part of that review. And says, I think the critical issue is what is being released is not in fact information, it's data. And data needs context to become information. And it is provision of that context that will be important. Okay. And what was behind that was that when they looked at a lot of the open data that was being published in the UK and elsewhere, often data were just being published. Here's an Excel file. Here's a CSV file, if you're lucky. If you're very unlucky, here's a PDF. And that's probably the best you're going to get is a CSV. And often that's all you'd get. You'd just get a CSV file. Right? And so in 2012, following this Audit Commission review, they published a report. You probably can't see the title. It's called Cross-Government Review Implementing Transparency. It was published by the NAO in 2012. And one of the things it said was, contextual information about data, including quality disclosure, should be published to assist interpretation. That was 2012. Go and have a look on data.gov.uk this evening when you're traveling home. You tell me how much context is published with that data. The context question has raised its head in other places as well. I love the Daily Mail, not that I read it, but I love the Daily Mail because the Daily Mail is an organ that's really embraced open data and government transparency because it's a cheap way of generating headlines. So here's an example from the Mail Online. Spending watchdog fritters away £53,000 on designer office chairs, some costing nearly £900 each. Dear me, outraged taxpayer of Milton Keynes or whatever. A local government chronicle, is transparency making things clear, actually, or is it making it worse? So here's another interesting little quote. This is Paul Davidson, who was the head of local e-government standards body back in 2011. And he says, if you look at the spending data, you see that they spent £500,000 on hotels last year. It doesn't actually tell you anything. Was this for many small, good value rooms? At travel lodges or ibises or whatever? Or was it a few fat cats in government departments staying at the Ritz? We don't know. Interesting backstory to this, these £900 chairs, guess what they were? They were staff who had health problems and had had a workstation assessment done, and it had been determined that they needed special office furniture. No context. Perfect story for the Mail. So earlier on in my talk today, I banged on about linked data. This is part of the so-called Web of Linked Data Cloud, which is updated every now and then. And these are data sets around the world which are published in linked data format in RDF, following RDF best practice rules, and actually are linked together, are actually interoperable. This grows and grows and grows. Unfortunately, we still have huge amounts of open data that isn't published in a format that makes it interoperable like this. It's published in good old CSV, for example. So the real potential of open data, for me, is realized when you do make it linkable, when you actually then associate data with context by making it easy to link it with other things. And I mentioned this in my talk earlier. These are the infamous 5 stars of open linked data, which again have been around a long while now. 1, make your stuff available on the web. So, stick out a PDF. Make it available as structured data, e.g. Excel. 2-star, non-proprietary, CSV, 3-star. 4-star URIs to identify things so that people can point at your stuff. And 5-star, link your data to other people's data to provide context. And this is this gentleman, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, in 2010, proposed this. Nearly 10 years later, we made much progress beyond 3-star? Probably not. But going back to the project I talked about earlier, if you do get 5-star data, you can start to do interesting things with it, because you now start to have a much richer context provided by data being able to link together and interoperate. So in this project with FIRST and Borders College and Scottish Borders Council, one of the things we developed was an app that passengers on bus services could use to get information about rural bus services, but also to report disruptions and other information. And we built it using a linked data infrastructure. And what that allowed us to do, this is where I need to stand here for a moment, is it allowed us to demonstrate the power of context. Here's an observation. So imagine this has got longitude and latitude. It's an observation of a location. Okay, it's a real-time location, so what? Well, if I put that into my linked data ecosystem, I don't just know that it's a real-time location. I also know that it comes from this guy, Milan's Android phone, because he's a registered user. I also know that real-time location corresponds to the road network, because I've got data about road segments. That allows me then, obviously, to situate it in a map environment. But I know more about it than that. Because I've got my linked data ecosystem, I know that road network is part of the bus route for the X95 route in the Scottish Borders. I know that's linked to the bus service, the X95. I know the timetable that that's associated with. I know the operator. Imagine then I get this situation. So here's a real-time observation from this guy's mobile phone. He's telling me he's traveling on a bus. But in my linked data ecosystem, at this moment in time, the timetable says the bus should be over there. Okay, I've now got two observations. I've got what the timetable says the bus should be at, and I've got the real-time location from the passenger. They're not the same. They're not even close. They're actually one's the other side of a river. So if I did a quality assessment based on that data, I'd say, well, best guess I can make is this is a real-time location. It's associated with this bus service, but there's something wrong. I'll skip over that. But imagine in my linked data ecosystem, I've got another piece of information. I've got a road closure disruption. What I can now do, and in fact we did in this project, is we had an artificial intelligence which was actually able to reason about the data and was able to say things like this. Oops. Well, there's a disruption. So although the real-time location isn't on the bus route, there is an explanation of why that might be the case, because the main route that the bus would normally travel on is closed due to a disruption. And all of that because I have the context around that one single observation from that passenger. Okay? So context matters, and it allows you to do interesting things. I'm going to skip over that. Now, as I've already said, although context is very powerful, and the Audit Office 10 years ago said it was important, we still have a lot of data that's published without any context at all. This is a screen grab from the Open Data Barometer for the UK. And the important bit to look at is down here. This is it scores various data sets, and it scores the preparedness of those data sets for different countries around the world. And if you look down here, all these red dots, and the largest concentration of red dots, is in answer to the question, are data identifiers provided for key elements in the data set? Okay, so again, some work to do on actually properly describing our data in a way that provides the fullest context. There are some steps being taken to try and deal with this. The Open Data Institute now has its Open Data Certificate, which you can apply for your data, where you have bronze, silver, gold, and platinum levels of data certificate. Interesting, if you look at platinum, satisfies the gold requirements, but has machine-readable provenance documentation, uses unique identifiers in the data. The publisher has a team offering support, really saying, I'm going to give you as much background and context about this data as I can to make it useful to you. There are solutions out there to help people associate provenance with data. For many years, people in my research group were part of the World Wide Web Consortium Provenance Working Group, which led to the standard Prov. There is now a W3C standard for characterizing data and other digital artifacts provide provenance about them. And it allows you to codify things like who, what, where, how, describing data, describing resources. Okay. If you do a very quick search, you'll very quickly come across this document, the Data Ethics Framework. The latest iteration of it was published by DCMS last summer, just about a year ago. And one of the things it says for people publishing open data is understand the limitations of the data, and you must understand the impact of data provenance on accuracy, reliability, and representativeness. And it challenges people publishing open data to make all of answers to these types of questions a key part of what they do before they publish data. My feeling is, not only should they answer those questions, they should publish the answers to those questions with the data. You know, so that we understand issues like whether the data was collected by humans or an automated system. You know, how well the data reflects a target population. You know, that there has been some scrutiny of bias, etc. Here's a nice little example just to finish with of some work that we did a couple of years ago. Again, just demonstrating provenance. So imagine you have this observation, okay? And I give you that data element. I say, here's an observation of a bus. Yeah, so what? If I tell you that that observation was generated by a map matching algorithm, okay, but if I then tell you that map matching algorithm used that observation, and that observation was generated by a sensing process that was associated with an iPhone sensor, suddenly you have a lot more context around that observation. Yeah? That isn't a real observation of a bus. Yeah, it's a projection through an algorithm based on a derived measurement from a user with a mobile phone. You can see the difference between just being given that at face value and having this tiny bit of context. So I said I was going to finish with something that had been happening today while we've been talking. So my bottom line is context is critical to understand and make appropriate use of data. I'm not the only person saying that. National Audit Office have been saying it. Provenance is one form of important contextual metadata. It's really useful when you're looking at assessments of quality, trustworthiness, reliability around data, being able to ask questions around bias. There are lots of issues regarding provenance annotations. Where will they come from? At the moment, we get very little provenance associated with open data. But there may be hope, because while we've been here today, there was a blog post from the Government Data Service, from John Strudwick, who's the interim director of the Government Data Service. And this literally was about 4 hours ago, who posted, help us improve government data standards, and said, quote, we're also going to publish a blog post on the importance of data standards and others to discuss lineage, provenance, and recommendations about particular file types. So maybe there's hope. Thank you very much.